Hi there, Russell. Welcome to the Reading Fabricator, and today I'm going to talk about one of my absolute favourite books of the last few years. I mean, this one completely floored me. I am a massive fan of the Southern Gothic literature. Things like Cormac McCarthy and Flannery O'Connor's short stories, in particular, A Good Man is Hard to Find. There's just something about the way the writing is for the American South is absolutely fascinating. And that is The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock. Now, I understand it's like set in Ohio, and Donald Ray Pollock worked up in Ohio, so that's technically not the South of America, but it's written in such a way that it could be. And it's wonderfully written, absolutely wonderfully written. He is a great writer. I was surprised to find out that Donald, pretty much spent most of his life just working in a factory setting, and then just decided with retirement that he was going to go to school and learn how to write fiction, and then came out with this as his first feature novel. And you'd think he'd been writing for years. This is absolutely wonderful stuff. You read this and you'd think that he's got a back catalogue of work, but no, he's only got one or two other things, like a short story collection called Knock 'em Stiff, and I think another one called The Heavenly Table or something like that. So, that might not be the name of the book, but I'm really looking forward to reading Knock 'em Stiff. I keep hearing good things about that. If it's anything like The Devil All the Time, then I'm going to absolutely love it. I really am. So high praise indeed. He's a very unsettling writer. Lots and lots of talk of violence and, in particular, religion. That religion plays a big part in this book, and it sort of, I wouldn't say it redefines American Gothic, but it certainly pretty much paves a way for I'd say modern Gothic American literature, even though I haven't read that much modern stuff, and it's just absolutely captivating. Now, for a book that's under 300 pages, there are a whole host of characters in this thing, at least a dozen, and they take place over the course of, I'd say, 3 storylines, although you could make an argument for a fourth one, but I think the 3 storylines, they all introduce all the characters, and then they intersect in very interesting ways. Now, the first storyline is of the Russell family. So you've got Willard Russell. I'm going to go back and say that the actual plot line of this book takes place from the tail end of World War II all the way through the 1960s. And it starts off with Willard Russell, who is the son of Emma Russell. And he's just come back from war, and there's this wonderful passage in the book. It pretty much describes how Willard came to be a religious person, and how he has this almost like a PTSD type thing. And it's where him and a group of soldiers are trudging through this battlefield, and I'm pretty sure it takes place in the South Pacific. And they come across this cross, this makeshift cross, and it's got a soldier from their army, almost flayed, almost like skinned alive, just hanging up there on the cross, there to send a message to them, obviously. And he goes up to them, to the soldier, picks up his dog tags to see who it is, and as he does this, the soldier breathes out. He just comes alive. He's missing all his skin. He's just innards and tendons and muscle, and he's breathing in and out, and he's rustling around, and there's flies all over him. It's bloody, and it freaks Willard out so much. But he decides to put the guy out of his misery, walks to the side, puts a gun to his head, and shoots him. And this instant pretty much stays with him all the way through to the end of Willard's life. He's always remembering it, and it leads him to have this almost religious type epiphany, and it leads him to pretty much building crosses in his backyard of his home and praying at them all the time. It's quite a wonderful moment, actually. It sounds brutal, but it's really well written. So the war is over, and Willard and a bunch of soldiers are on the bus heading back to their hometown. And the bus decides to take a little break. It stops off in this small town. And Willard gets off, crosses the street, and goes to this cafe, this diner. Think any sort of like 1940s, 50s diner that comes to mind. It's one of those places, basically. And when he's in there, he catches the eye. He sees this waitress by the name of Charlotte, who to his mind is the most beautiful person he's ever met. And just the look of her and the conversation they have just stays with him. And as he's going home, as he's being driven home by his uncle Erskine, he tells him about this girl and how he will go back there and talk to her and everything like that. Also on this ride back to his hometown, he presents Erskine with this, I think it was a Walter or a Luger, I can't remember what, and claims that this is the gun that Hitler used to kill himself, that he picked it up on the way back from World War II. And this gun will play a big part in the book. It will stay with you through the book. It's like just the main piece that gets passed down from character to character. Anyway, he goes back to the cafe. He strikes up more conversations with Charlotte. Ends up, getting together with her. They move to a little isolated cabin, like a rundown place up in the hills, which is owned by a very nasty lawyer. And what ends up happening is Willard kills the lawyer pretty much and uses his blood on the prayer log to be able to help his wife see if, sort of like I wouldn't say a sacrifice or something like that, but just something to help pray to help his wife get better, because his wife, Charlotte, ends up getting cancer, and it's pretty bad, and it just escalates, gets worse and worse, and she dies soon after that anyway. They had this son, Arvin Russell, and Arvin's pretty much made an orphan, because what happens is the night that they get back from the funeral, Willard goes out to the prayer log, ends up slicing his own throat open and killing himself. And when Arvin goes up to the prayer log at night with a torch, just walking through these bushes to get there, he just sees Willard just bent down over the prayer log, and he thinks he's still alive, and he's yelling at him saying, "No, I don't want to pray with you anymore," because Willard pretty much forces him to pray, just abuses him, hits him, tells him to get on there and pray for the mother to get better. And this has been going on for a long time. So he yells at him saying, "I don't want to pray anymore," and then he comes to find that he's dead. And so what ends up happening is Arvin goes down to the local convenience store, gets the old man to call up a deputy by the name of Lee Bodecker. Now, Lee Bodecker will play an important part in the book as well. Lee Bodecker takes this little boy, takes him to I think the next town. It's not quite the next town over, but it's a fair way from where they are. And this is where he meets his grandmother and his grandmother's brother for the first time. And they are Emma Russell and Erskine. And this is the first time he meets them. And he also meets this girl by the name of Lenora Lafferty, who's about a year younger than him. Now, this is where the second storyline takes place. The second storyline involves a brother and his cousin by the name of Roy Lafferty and Theodore. Now, they're travelling preachers. One's in a wheelchair because he drank some poisonous substance and it pretty much fucked up his legs. But Theodore plays the guitar while Roy preaches, and he preaches in very, I'd say, extravagant ways. Now, the first time that they come into effect is when, before Willard goes back and marries Charlotte, he goes to the church with his mother. And this is when Theodore and Roy show up to the church for the first time. And the way they pray is he plays the guitar. Roy, preaches something or other that gets through to the crowd, but then he picks up this jar of, I can't remember, they're like a specific type of spider. They're not supposed to bite you, but he pours this jar of spiders over his head, just sitting there, because he says he has a fear of it, and so he pours it over there to prove that religion has gotten to him, that he is pretty much healed. And it freaks everyone out. While all this is happening, Emma has invited this girl by the name of Helen Hatton to sit next to him, and she's trying to hook Helen up with Willard. It doesn't end up happening. Helen ends up falling head over heels for the preacher, Roy. And this is where Roy and Helen get together. They have their child, and that is Lenora, the girl who's a year younger than Arvin, who shows up at Emma and Erskine's house. And what ends up happening is during one of the preaching sessions, when Roy is pouring spiders over his head, one of the spiders bites him pretty badly, and his head balloons up, and he locks himself away in a room for a couple of weeks. And when he comes out there, he thinks that he's had this divine intervention. And what that divine intervention is that he takes Helen and Theodore out into the woods. Now, before this happens, Helen drops off the baby Lenora to Emma and Erskine and asked them to look after her, sorry. And they agree to, thinking that she'll come back and pick her up. But she goes out to the car. They drive out to the woods. Theodore's in the back seat. Roy and Helen go for a little walk. They walk just a slight way away from the car. And then he stabs her in the neck with, I think, a screwdriver or something like that. And through this divine intervention, he thinks that he can bring her back to life. Obviously, he can't. She's dead. But now he's a murderer, so he has to get rid of the body, and then him and Theodore go on the run, and this leads to a whole other thing where they're doing a storyline of traveling across America, being part of a carnival and that sort of thing. And I really liked this storyline, actually. It was quite interesting. Every time I got to a page or a chapter where it would show their name show up, my ears would prick up, and I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. So it's a very, very good couple of characters there. This all sounds convoluted, but it makes sense when you're reading the book. It slowly feeds it to you, and then you just get a grapple on the situation and are able to follow it through. And that's because the chapters are very short. It hits you in small pieces, and it allows you to absorb everything. So that's why I say it's very well written. Because if this was a dense book, you'd struggle to get through it. You'd have to have a book as long as Anna Karenina or something like that for all these characters. You'd have to have a glossary on the front of it showing how each character is related to one another. But the way he's done it here, it's short, it's precise, it's to the point, and above all, it's enticing. It keeps you interested. Now, the third storyline involves the sister of the Deputy Lee Bodecker, who I mentioned earlier before, and she worked at the same diner as Charlotte. But a certain someone comes in there and sees her, and his name is Carl Henderson, who is a wannabe photographer. And he talks about how he wants to go to LA and become famous and that sort of thing. And so he pretty much entices her to come with him. They hook up, they get together, they travel to Los Angeles. Something very bad happens. It involves being on the set of a porn film. And it leads to him buying a gun. Now, with this failure of Hollywood dreams behind them, they decide to travel back. And on the way back, they pick up this guy. And one thing leads to another. And what ends up happening is they pull over, they shoot the guy, and then it leads to this whole serial killer crime spree, which takes place over many years, where they'll go on these trips. And on these trips, they'll pick up hitchhikers. They'll travel to a remote place, and they'll force them to usually do sexual favors with Sandy while Cole takes pictures of them, and then kill them, and then take more pictures of them. And they just keep doing this on and on again, so they pretty much become pretty prolific serial killers, and they're never caught, so it's actually quite fascinating that they're never caught. And a lot of this book is dedicated to it, a lot, almost as much as dedicated to them as the Russell family, even though I consider Arvin Russell to be the main character of the book. Now, what's going to happen is the first storyline involving the Russell family, the second storyline involving Roy and Theodore and Lenora, the baby, and then the third storyline involving Carl and Sandy. They all intersect. I'm not going to say what happens, but let's just say that everything just comes to play, especially towards the end of the book. But there's one character in it who's not part of all these storylines, except for maybe the Russell family one. But what ends up happening is the preacher at the church that the Russell family frequently attend, especially Lenora, who turns out to be quite a Bible fanatic. She's described as plain, and she's always wearing things on her head. She gets bullied a lot, which leads to this fantastic bit in the book where Arvin pretty much tracks down the three bullies one by one and takes them all not together, but rather in other situations where they're vulnerable. And it's a callback to a scene where Willard and Arvin are praying at the prayer log, and they're getting pretty much they're not getting yelled at, but they're overhearing these two hunters talk pretty obscene things about his wife Charlotte. So he pretty much drives down to the local. You wouldn't really call it a tavern or a pub or anything like that, but it's like a place which serves liquor, and he beats the living shit out of them. And he pretty much distills this as a lesson onto his son Arvin and tells him, oh, you got to pick your battles, son. Pick your battles right. Pick your fights at the right time. And Arvin takes this to heart. And, Arvin frequently refers to this as the greatest day he ever spent with his father. But anyway, Lenora is a massive Bible fanatic. So is Emma Russell. And Arvin, I think, just does it just for the hell of it, just to keep them happy. But the preacher who normally preaches at their church. He gets sick, so he has to leave. So he calls in, I think, his nephew, who's Preston Teagarden. Now, this guy's a real piece of work. He's also a rapist of young girls, and I'm not going to say what happens, but basically he gets involved with Lenora, and which sets Arvin off, and this whole thing pretty much comes to play with the gun that Willard brought back from the war. And that's that storyline as well. That's sort of a combination of the Lafferty and the Russell family storylines. But needless to say, there are quite a lot of intersecting stories going on here, and it's handled masterfully. It's always going. It never loses you. And there was a few times where I read this book, though, where I was like, oh shit, yeah, that happened in that time period, this one happened in that time period. And then, even though it takes place over the course of, I don't know, like 15 years, no, more than that actually, it'd be something like over 20 years this book takes place over. It feels like a long time, but it's written in such a way where you're able to just allow it to just bring you in without overwhelming you. That's a good word. It doesn't overwhelm you. And a book like this, you know, the way I've described it, the way I'm talking about the storylines, the way I'm talking about all these characters, you'd think it was fucking like War and Peace, like 1,400 pages, but it's not. It's less than 300 pages. It gets to the point, and it does it well. Very well written book. I highly recommend it. For mature readers only, because there is a lot of talk of, you know, violence and rape in this book, suicide as well. Just, yeah, a lot of stuff going on in here. It really is the devil all the time, pretty much. In fact, I'm going to finish this by reading a passage from the book. Now, this is a spoiler, so if you haven't read the book or hell even seen the movie, then by all means turn it off now. But what I'm going to do is read the section where Arvin shoots Preston Teagarden. Now, the reason I'm reading this is because there is one line of dialogue in this book which I think is one of the greatest things I've ever read. I think it's one of the greatest bits of dialogue I've ever read in a book. Very well written. See what you think of it. You'll know which bit of dialogue I'm talking about when you hear it. It'll be the last thing that I say from the page. Now hold on here, goddammit. Jesus Christ, man, you wouldn't kill a preacher, would you? You ain't no preacher, you worthless piece of shit, Arvin said. Teagarden began crying, true tears running down his face for the first time since he was a little boy. Let me pray first, he sobbed. He started to put his hands together. I already did it for you, Arvin said. Put in one of them special requests you fuckers are always talking about. Asked him to send you straight to hell. Man, that last line, that's going to stay with me forever. I think that's a fantastic last line. Very, very well articulated. Anyway, I've taken up too much of your time. A lot of this has been dedicated to pretty much describing the storylines, but I hope I haven't given too much away. Needless to say, it is a fantastically written book. Is it my favourite of the year? I don't know. It's probably between this and Dune and Geek Love. Geek Love, for some reason, is staying with me a lot, but it's damn near up there. It's a good read, yeah. I'm glad I read it, and I hope you read it too. Yeah, all the best. See you next time.